This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to George Turcotte, who just signed up this week to support us on Patreon, and to David Mercurio Rivera, who just made a very generous contribution to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 463 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be reviewing the HBO series Avenue 5, a science fiction comedy about a cruise ship in space. And this will include spoilers for all of Season 1, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So first up, we've got our producer, John Joseph Adams. He's the editor of Lightspeed Magazine, and the series editor of the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, and he's also edited more than 30 other anthologies. His latest project is the 3-volume dystopia triptych, Ignorance is Strength, Burn the Ashes, and Or Else the Light. So John, welcome back.
Always good to be here. And I promise this is my real accent.
The next up, we've got Erin Lindsey, making her 30th appearance on the show. She's the author of the Bloodbound series of epic fantasy novels and the Nicholas Lenoir series of paranormal detective novels, which she writes under the name Il Tetensor. The Silver Shooter, the latest novel in her Rose Gallagher series of historical mysteries, is out now. So, Erin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, as always, for having me.
And also joining us today is Tom Gerencer, making his 16th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Realms of Fantasy and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction. His nonfiction book Think Like Google is out now, and his new book How It's Made, written for the Discovery Channel, will be out in December. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's start off with John and have you tell us about your expectations going into Avenue 5.
Well, I had decent expectations for it because I'd watched, I think by the time I saw this, every episode of Veep, and so this was created by the creator of Veep. And so, I loved Veep, and so I was really looking forward to seeing what they did with the science fiction show. Plus, it sounded very Douglas Adams-esque, so I had pretty high expectations.
So I've never watched Veep, but when you say you watched every episode, that's a lot of episodes, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think it ran for 7 seasons, but they were like those short HBO seasons. So it was like, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 14 episodes or something like that each season. But I mean, yeah, it's a pretty large number though.
And this is a pretty similar style of humor to Veep?
No.
It's like, it's much broader on Avenue 5, more sort of zany, I guess. I mean, there's a little bit of a similarity in like some of the meanness, because like Veep has a lot of mean humor,
Dark humor too.
Yeah, and so some of that kind of crosses over, but yeah, it's fairly different.
So Erin, you've seen Veep as well, it sounds like.
Oh yeah.
Veep. Have you seen every episode?
I have not seen every episode, but it's always been a catch as catch can thing for me. But I've enjoyed every episode I've watched, and some of them are some of the funniest things ever on television, in my opinion.
So did you have any other expectations about Avenue 5 based on the cast or anything else?
Yes, I'm a huge Hugh Laurie fan. I'm a fan of his dramatic work. I'm a fan of his comedic work. And so I really also had, I would say my expectations fluctuated a little bit. I had really high expectations when I saw the concept. I can't remember where I saw an article about it or something, and saw the cast members and the concept and thought this is going to be amazing. And then my expectations were dashed when I started reading some of the early reviews. And then they were kind of boosted again by you saying you were doing this show, because I thought, well, that's an encouraging sign. Like somebody has watched this and thought that it was worth doing a show about. So they kind of fluctuated, I would say, going into it.
Well, this is all, I hadn't seen the show when I contacted you. John had recommended it. So all blame and or credit goes to John on this one.
I have to say, for as far as the expectations fluctuating and everything, like I didn't know anything about the reception of the show when I watched it. 'Cause I think maybe I was watching it right as it was airing. But I did hear some of the negative reviews and stuff as it was airing. I mean, I didn't go out seeking them, but being a person who pays attention to science fiction media, obviously I couldn't avoid it completely. So I could totally see expectations being dashed by those things, because there was a lot of negative reception.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll also say I'd never seen Hugh Laurie in anything because, I never watched House because I don't watch, as John knows, I don't watch any cop, doctor, or lawyer shows.
That's like 90% of shows.
Yeah, so I don't watch 90% of shows. And I guess you like the
You
guy
never
Matt
watched
from...
Blackadder?
No.
Really?
And I know that the guy Matt is from Silicon Valley, which in principle I would watch, but I never have. So I did recognize Neelix from Voyager. But that's
he'll always be
a
Neelix.
It's a bit of a deep cut there. But how about Tom? What were your expectations going into Avenue 5?
Yeah, I had zero expectations. I didn't know anything about it. I'd never heard of it. I missed Avenues 1 through 4. kind of like Ted Nugent wondering what happened to COVID's 1 through 18. I also am a huge Hugh Laurie fan, but I didn't know he was going to be in it until I started watching it, and I was like, "Oh, cool!" And I was like, "Oh no, he has an American accent again, like he did in the House." And then I was like, "Oh, good, he doesn't." But in between there, I was like, "What is he doing? He can't be like losing it, can he?" But
we have to talk about this more later.
Yes, absolutely. But I also am a fan of the actor who plays R-rated Olaf in this, Josh Gad, and I didn't know he was going to be in it. And Erin, like you,
Olaf.
I was a big Blackadder fan as well. I actually lived in London for a year while it was a thing, while it was showing, and got to like it there, and then carried that home and watched it at home. So yeah, big Hugh Laurie fan, but no expectations going into it whatsoever. Dave said, "Here, watch this," and I was like, "Oh, what's this?"
And you hadn't heard anything about it or heard of any reviews or anything like that?
No, I had heard absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah. I don't know that I definitely remember, that it came out, that it was a science fiction show, but I don't know if I don't think I'd heard any of the reviews or anything. I didn't even look it up on Rotten Tomatoes or anything before I started watching it. So I was going into it really with no particular expectations.
I think a big part of the problem of the show maybe reaching as wide an audience, or at least among science fiction people, as you might expect for a big show on HBO with a good cast and with a sort of notable creator. It's called Avenue 5. Why did they call it that? It doesn't mean anything. It's like in the show they it makes some sense why they call it the ship that, but I mean, as a name of a science fiction show, it's it doesn't sound like a science fiction show. Also, you can't Google that shit.
Well, John, maybe they're doing a play off of Serenity. I mean, when I first heard of that, I was like, "What's that? Some kind of old person's undergarment?"
Yeah, I mean, I forget what it was, but I Googled something Avenue 5, and it came up with all these results for involving Fifth Avenue in New York City. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I agree that could be an issue.
So I was just going to speculate that it's like a kind of there's the Babylon 5 maybe is where the 5 comes from. What it made me think of was Avenue Q.
Yes,
I don't know if you.
I was just going to say that. Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
a cross of Avenue Q with Babylon 5.
Yeah,
which sounds like a better idea than it is.
Right.
No, that would be a great idea, like space drama with Muppets. Yeah. Because if you don't know what Avenue Q is, it's a off Broadway or on Broadway show, Erin?
On Broadway, I think.
On Broadway show where they just have basically R-rated Muppets, and it's fantastic because it's like Bert and Ernie, how Bert and Ernie would be if they were in the real world, and it's like all the different characters on Sesame Street, how they would really be if they were like Cookie Monster. Was he like the the Cookie Monster stand-in was like basically a drug addict or something. Always like instead of being like cookie. Oh, you never saw it? It was fantastic.
No.
It was so funny.
I should see it though. I think it would be right up my alley. Like if you grew up especially on Fraggle Rock and just found that whole thing slightly acid-based to begin with.
Yep.
The concept of turning that into a comedy it's a great premise.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you've probably, or many people listening have probably heard the song "The Internet Is for Porn."
Yeah.
That comes from
Yes.
Avenue Q.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's actually any connection, but when I was listening to interviews and stuff, a lot of the people involved in this show, Avenue 5, have theater and improv and stuff backgrounds. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was in somebody's head somewhere.
Interesting.
I mean, that's a believable enough theory that if you just said that to me straight without like, parsing it as like, oh, this is just a theory. Like if you just told me that that's what the creator said, I would have believed you. That makes sense.
I'm an excellent liar. You do not want to take me at Balderdash.
But so I know that John overall likes this show because he recommended that we watch it. At least I hope he does. It wasn't just intended. He hates us and wants to punish us or something. So Erin, so you said you had all these fluctuating expectations. So kind of what were your initial reactions when you started actually watching the show?
I think, I was really excited about the premise, and toward the end of the season, I felt like this.
Okay, wait.
Just hang on.
Don't get into the end of this season.
It just makes sense. I'm just going to draw a little loop for you here. I came back to feeling more positive about it than I had at the beginning. But those first few episodes, I was overall fairly disappointed. I think because it's just a style of humor that I don't tend to connect with. I found it very blunt, and kind of they overplayed their hand on virtually every joke. And I was looking for, Veep has it's a sort of got a frenetic pace that I appreciate, but there's also a really good mixture of extremely subtle, nuanced humor, clever humor, and then with a few sort of more bombastic absurdist things thrown in there. And I was kind of expecting that approach. And so maybe that, that frame, if I hadn't known that it was from the creator of Veep, maybe that would have helped, because I wouldn't have been looking for a spirit that I wasn't getting out of it. But, overall, I struggled with it, I will say.
Okay. Actually, maybe since you mentioned the premise, maybe I should just set up the premise. So I said it's a cruise ship in space. And so Hugh Laurie is the captain, quote unquote. But it turns, and this is a ship, it's like a cruise ship going around on an 8-week trip around Saturn and back. And so Hugh Laurie is the captain, but it turns out that he's just an actor who's been hired because the guy who really runs the ship is this guy, Joe, who hates interacting with anyone. And so he's hired Hugh Laurie to be the sort of charismatic captain so that he doesn't have to deal with people. Also aboard, there's a lot of different passengers, but I'll also just mention that the owner of there's this guy, Judd, who's a billionaire, and he owns the ship. And so let's just start with that. But so John, when you first watched this show, what did you think of the first couple episodes?
I actually love it. I loved it from the start. I loved it all the way through. I was really surprised actually when I saw the negative comments online and stuff, and like including people like saying like it spits in the eye of Douglas Adams, and I was like, huh? Like I kind of felt like Douglas Adams would love this show.
Yeah.
But I saw all kinds of negative comments, and it was really surprising to me.
Could you just wait? Sorry, why were people saying that like this doesn't have any official connection to Douglas Adams?
Right. No, but because I don't know if a lot of people are comparing it to like feeling like a Douglas Adams, sort of thing. But I think I did. Like on Twitter. So maybe it was just somebody saying that to me on Twitter. But because I watched it and I loved it and I was like recommending it, and somebody else who had seen it made that comment. That it was like an insult to Douglas Adams, whereas I was saying like, if you love Douglas Adams, you would probably love this. So anyway,
so Tom, did you feel that this spit in the eye and or other body part of Douglas Adams?
Well, it spits all over the place, but I don't think it hit Douglas Adams with any of it. I think it was. I thought it was very entertaining. No, as a huge Douglas Adams fan, I didn't feel like this, ripped him off in any way. I felt like it was in sort of the same spirit, but it certainly didn't, try to ape any of his little techniques or anything like that. Or it was just really, I thought it was very clever. I really enjoyed it. I thought it could have, if I had one criticism of it, I felt like the characters were lacking depth. I felt like there could have been a little bit more realism to the characters, and it would have helped the humor. I usually feel like, there's like a difference between, you can kind of tell, and I'll point this gun right at myself, but you can kind of tell when a writer has thought of a funny line in the shower and wrote it down somewhere and was like, I got to work this into a script. And when the humor is actually coming out of a character's emotions and empathizing with the character, there's a big difference. And I felt like that writer's room for Avenue Q would have been a lot of fun to be in. I imagine they just had...
You mean Avenue 5, right?
Avenue 5, pardon me. Either one. Yeah. But Avenue 5 certainly would have been a lot of fun to be part of. I heard a quote recently, like the writer's room must have used up a considerable quantity of meth. I don't know if that was directed at Avenue 5 or at something else I watched recently. But I did feel like it was just probably a really fun writer's room. I thought they had a lot of really funny lines that worked really well, but I felt like they were kind of, in a lot of cases, disembodied from any kind of internal character thing going on. But overall, like that's my one criticism. But I want to be careful to make sure that that criticism is shrunk down quite a bit, because I did enjoy the show immensely. I do really like seeing Hugh Laurie anytime he's on the screen doing anything. And I thought Josh Gad was phenomenal in this. Like, I just absolutely, when I first heard it, like the first 30 seconds when I heard his voice, I was like, who is that? And then I was like, that's Olaf from Frozen. That's the obsequious guy from Beauty and the Beast. Like, I love that guy's voice. And I've never seen him before. So when I was watching him, I was like, oh, okay. But then he did such a phenomenal job. Like, anytime he was on the screen as well, I was just like, this guy is hilarious. Like, his whole mannerism, the way his delivery, everything was perfect. I loved the cruise director, the inept and overly emotional cruise director, or just like internally broken cruise director was phenomenal. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a bit raunchy at times and a bit, it went over the top at times, but it was fun. I had a good time watching it. I never was like, I got to sit down and watch another episode of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess my reaction was a little bit like Erin. I mean, I thought the show was fun. Like, I think its strength is that it's funny. Like, it's legitimately funny to me. I laugh pretty regularly watching the episodes. But then kind of each episode, I sort of got to the end and I was like, oh, that was funny. And I didn't feel like super motivated to watch the next one. Because, yeah, like Tom's saying, I didn't feel like I cared that much what happened, like who the characters were or what happened to them. And I have a lot more I could say about that. But I guess maybe I should also explain that. So the guy on the ship who actually runs everything dies in a weird accident. And so then all these people, have to sort of figure, and the ship is thrown off course. And so then all the people who are left behind are all sort of selfish and incompetent and, abrasive. And they all have to kind of like figure out what to do, or or they should be figuring out what to do, but don't really. But yeah, so Erin, go ahead. You want to add something there?
Well, I was just going to say, just like listening to us talk about it, I'm struck again by how on paper all the beats are there, and it just never really worked for me. And I think a big problem is what Tom said. I think a lot of the characters were a little bit too cartoonish, or a lot too cartoonish. They just kind of overplayed their hand for me. There were a couple of standout characters. I found Josh Gad a little bit too off-brand Jack Black. It was like, it was just a little bit too familiar to me. That being said, when it was working, I think he had some of the funniest moments there. I thought Zach Woods as Matt, the customer relations guy, it was a kind of one of the more VP performances. I think of the whole thing and one of the more VP characters, and maybe that's why I liked it. I loved Iris. I just want to watch the Iris and Rav. I would watch all day long.
Oh,
Rav
Sarah,
is the super harried mission control woman back on Earth with hair that I don't even know what to say about it. It's very Avenue Q.
Speaking of cartoonish, Iris, she looks like a cartoon with that hair.
That's what I mean. She kind of looks like a Muppet with what they've done with the hair, because the hair is just like this amazing shape. It's very triangular. It's almost mad scientist hair. I just appreciate it to hell and back. And then Iris, who's the very sort of caustic / emotionally stunted / hardworking personal assistant / everything for Josh Gad's billionaire character is also great. But I found a lot of the other characters really, really one note and just silly, and it's too bad. But I will say I wanted to give absolute incredible props to Hugh Laurie, because the first few episodes, so if you haven't watched House, Dave, I kind of have a thing about accents. I notice them a lot. I do accents. I'm just kind of really into them. I think it's a music thing. But anyway, so one of the things that always impressed me about Hugh Laurie is that in his however many jillions of seasons of House, you almost never, ever questioned that he was American. His American accent is amazing. And so these first couple of episodes, you have him running around playing an American captain. And my first question was, why?
Exactly.
My second question is, why is he so bad at it? Has he lost his touch? And then, of course, they explain it later that, in fact, so my point being, he totally sold it. He did a great job of a Brit doing an almost, but not quite, perfect American accent. And it turns out that that's, in fact, what's going on, which I loved. I totally loved that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, too, because, like you, I mean, when I first saw House, I was like, who's that guy who plays him? He looks familiar. And then I looked him up on IMDb like you do. And I was like, oh, he's the guy from Blackadder. He's Hugh Laurie. I love this guy. But wait a minute.
Very British.
Isn't he British? Yeah, I was like, wait. And then I thought about it. I was like, I know he's British, because there's no way he started out in America and then moved over to England and adopted this perfect British accent and then moved back here. I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. And then I read about him and I was like, no, yeah, he's British. He just is phenomenal at doing an American accent, to the point where I'm completely fooled. It's not just an American accent. It's a specific species of American accent that he obviously worked very, very hard to master. And like you said, I haven't watched every episode of House, but I probably watched like 15, 20 episodes. And I loved, like, one of my favorite things about the show is just listening to the nuance in his accent and being like, man, this guy just nails it. And then
he's a musician, but anyways, that's my theory.
Well, I'm not a musician, but I love accents and I can do, pretty good accents. I believe it's a musical thing. Maybe I was a musician in a past life, but when I started watching Avenue 5, I was like, at first I was like, oh, Hugh Laurie. Oh, and then I was like, oh no, he's doing another American accent, because in my mind, British humor is just, I don't know why, it's just like 3 or 4 notches above American humor. I don't know why. Just something about a British accent makes a line funnier, and I have no idea why that is. Maybe that's just me, or maybe I don't know. But so I was kind of disappointed that he had this American accent. I was like, oh, that's too bad. He's funny, but he could be so much funnier if this was like a British accent. And then when he starts to lose his American accent, I was like, wow, is he just like phoning this in? Is he just like, I'm just done. I'm just over it. Like,
and he does it in the most plausible way, right? Is when he's getting emotional and freaking out, which is exactly when people can't do it right.
Exactly when they lose it. That's like when my main accent comes out, is when I start getting irritated. People will be like, oh, I hear that main accent.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll hear that as this panel goes on more and more.
Oh, let's Bob. No problem, Bob. But anyway, so yeah, when he started losing it, I was like, oh no. And then when it came out that was the plot, I was like, oh, now he's even more brilliant than I thought he was. But
all right, well, let me say kind of what my main issue is that I feel like the show, kind of like Erin was saying, like, there's no straight man in the show. And that seems like a basic enough kind of comedy. I mean, like, all these people are such comedy experts that I can't believe that wasn't ever discussed. So it seems like it must be intentional, but I really felt like the show needed, like, it's sort of like, you can't tell, is the captain the main character, or is Billy, who's sort of the chief engineer who's still alive, the main character? And neither of them, we don't really know anything about their backstory or like, you know, do we care if they get back to Earth or anything like that? And also it just seems really weird to me that Hugh Laurie, the captain, he knows that he's fake, but he doesn't know that the rest of the bridge crew are all actors. And it's like, why would I can't imagine why that situation would have come about. And so like Billy seems like she might be the main character because she's like the least absurd.
Right.
But she's still like, she's keeping secrets and, you know, sort of loses her temper all the time. And so she's not like, I just feel like there should be one character who's kind of like normal and sincere and who we identify with. And then like, you know, we see in their reactions to all the insanity going on around them. You know, it seems insane. There's like a contrast between the absurdity and the non-absurdity, where I feel like everything in this is absurd. All the characters are absurd. Like everything, all the scenes are absurd. Everything about the ship is absurd. Like, so, but I want to get John back in here. So John, do you want to defend anything there?
I mean, you know, I think it's just a matter of to each his own. Sort of, some people are going to like what it's doing, and some people don't, or it doesn't work as well. I mean, for me, like the all absurd thing works great. And I don't know. I wouldn't have said a lot of that same stuff that you got. I wouldn't have, you know, criticized a lot of that same stuff you guys were talking about, like in terms of like character development and stuff. Like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I sort of project certain things and like fill in certain things as I'm watching shows, and so I don't, you know, perceive, you know, character deficits as much. But I mean, like, I felt like they all, like, I felt like they all had a real identity, and I did care about them, and you know, it's I don't know, it really works for me. And you know, speaking of the sort of Veep connection though, you know, so the guy that plays Matt, he was also in Veep, and he uttered my favorite line on Veep, which was, "You're Frankenstein's monster if his monster was made entirely of dead dicks." That he just says that to somebody, and it was like, it was so hilarious to me when I heard it. I just like I think I like rewatched it like, you know, 5 times. But given that I love that line so much, it's like, you know, is it really a surprise that I loved Avenue 5?
But there was nothing that funny in Avenue 5. Like, that's a genuinely funny line. No, I meant, well, okay. I'm not saying there's nothing funny in the show. I'm saying that line is funnier than any one that I could pluck out of Avenue 5.
Oh, I don't know. That's a funny line, but I don't know. I think I might have to disagree with you there on that one, because there were some extremely funny lines in Avenue 5 that I couldn't help laughing out loud on.
Mm-hmm. So Matt, for instance, he says he's transformed the most disgusting thing imaginable into a kaleidoscope of butt truffles. That was pretty funny. Maybe not on par with the other one, but
so much of it, you know, and honestly, like, humor is such a personal thing. But for me, like, most episodes had 1 or 2 laugh out loud lines, a few smile crackers, and a lot of groaners. And to the point where I thought 2 things. One, I thought the overall humor level was about on a par with a mediocre episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway? And I thought that, and it had that kind of almost not quite improv feel to it. So that's why I was kind of interested in Dave said a lot of them had improv backgrounds. Maybe that's it. But it got to the point for me where the running gag with the stand-up comedian who's never funny almost felt a bit meta. Like, you know, these crickets chirping in the room when he's delivering his jokes. That's kind of how a lot of it landed with me, I have to be honest.
Did you think, Erin, that it got, because I thought it got better and better throughout the season. Did you feel that way, or did it sort of stay at the same level for you?
I think it did get better, or at least that I became more accustomed to it. And I think that's why I became more optimistic about the show. Is I do think kind of 2 things happen with comedies in general. One is it takes the room a while to start breaking into its stride, you know, like the writing room. I mean, I think it always takes shows a while to sort of settle into a comedy groove. And I also think there's a certain amount of priming of the audience that's required before the humor really starts to hum on your end as well. So on the one hand, the writing maybe gets objectively better, but on the other hand, you start to understand the nuance and sort of, you can predict the beats a little bit better, because a lot of comedy, of course, is about defying expectations or meeting expectations. There's a lot of kind of call and answer between the viewer and the writer. And I think in order for that to work really well, you do need a certain level of experience with one another, if that makes sense.
Well, it's interesting because this morning I went back and rewatched the first 3 episodes, and they were way better the second time. So I think it is, I think there is just something about the style of humor or the characters or something that, like, once you kind of
it grows on you.
Well, yeah, kind of once you kind of know what, like you're talking about expectations, kind of like once you know what the show is, you know what to expect. I think you enjoy it more.
I mean, what Erin was just saying about the writer's room and stuff, that has me really intrigued about future seasons of Avenue 5. Like, if it can go for a while. I know it got renewed for a second season, but if it can go beyond that. Because, like, I was thinking about how, like, the U.S. version of The Office and Parks and Rec, those both ended up as 2 of my favorite comedies of all time. Like, I love those shows. But the first seasons were not good. And I think the first season of Avenue 5 is way better than the first season of either of those. And so if Avenue 5 has any kind of growth from season 1 to season 2 on par with what either of those shows did, which, again, were run by similarly very talented teams. So it's reasonable to expect that they could make such improvements. I mean, I think that could be amazing. Although, like I said, I already love the show. And as far as the bingeability of it and stuff, like, Christy and I, we were gobbling it up. Like, we watched 3-4 episodes a night. So, I mean, basically got through it in 2 nights. So,
well, I feel like in season 2, they're going to have a story, and there's like not really a story in season 1. You go and look at the episode synopses, and they're like, I've never seen such short, like episode synopses. And, I just feel like there needs to be some sort of like mystery on the ship, like something where you're like wondering what's going to happen next. It's like the structure right now. It really reminds me of like Gilligan's Island, where like every episode, there's some hope that they're going to get back sooner than they thought, and then something goes wrong, and then it turns out it's going to be longer than they thought, and it's just kind of like that over and over again. So,
I agree. I agree, and I wonder about the I'm kind of churning on all this stuff you said about Straight Man and just the way there's not really much of a plot here, but I think I'm trying to think. First of all, does anybody know? Did Blackadder was Rowan Atkinson the straight man, or was he another goofy character? It's hard for me to. I mean, he kind of was. It might
have varied from one season to the next because, as you may remember, Blackadder is set in there are different Blackadders.
Yeah.
So it might have varied, but the Blackadder that I remember the best which is the World War One, he's definitely the straight man.
Because he's the one who's like really irritated with all the idiocy going on around him, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I wonder, but then you think of like really successful comedy shows like The Office you were just talking about, John, and that show doesn't have a straight man. Oh, I suppose it does, right? It has John Krasinski.
John Krasinski.
Yeah.
But he's not like the central character so much. He kind of is like there to be like, these people are idiots. But the show is very much about all the different characters, isn't it? Like, they don't all hinge back to him every time, do they?
Right.
So I wonder if this show could succeed quite a bit more by kind of focusing on that. I thought, for me, some of the funniest moments in the show were around a character they killed, which I was so irritated when she died, was Sarah, the person from the blonde woman from the bridge who she was like, look, no, it doesn't do anything. I just move my hand around. She just cracks me up. I don't know who she is, but every time she was on the screen, I could not help laughing. And I was so irritated when her character died because I was like, no, that's like the best. That was the time when I felt like I was watching The Office whenever it was on her, because I was like, she is one character who definitely has something deep going on inside her that is also very funny. That I was wishing that more of the other characters would be more like that, like The Office, like they explore each character and then they start pitting them against each other, where they, where if Judd always seems to kind of have his teeth pulled, like he's crazy and he's in charge, but they always seem to be able to just kind of like, oh, well, we're going to just walk him back somehow. We'll just get around him really easily. It would be, I think, a lot funnier if he actually started to get his way on a lot of these things and started like becoming a real source of conflict in the show. And other characters did too, like trying to do their own things and kind of messing everybody else up and working at odds against each other. like you see in The Office, where like Dwight suddenly decides he's going to, do something crazy. I can't think of a specific instance, but there's lots of them where he suddenly decides he's going to, do something crazy, and he starts making it happen, and he's like wrecking everybody's life for several episodes. I just feel like there could have been more of that. But just one more thing I want to say before we completely move on was, Erin, you had said there's no real funny lines, and here's one by Matt in the final episode. He says, "Every year we pass the pre-anniversary of our death, but we don't know it, so there's no presents."
Yeah,
just
I
when
like
you're
that
talking,
one too.
when you're talking. So just this morning, I said I watched when Sarah's I think it's pretty much when she's introduced. She, like they're like this, like everything's gone wrong. They're like all going to die and everything, and she's like, "I just want to say that I've been in character for 4 weeks, and it's been a real artistic challenge."
Oh yes, yeah, I love that line. And then she's like, her real name is also Sarah,
right?
So they're always like asking her, like, "Are you in character?" She's like, "Well, right now I'm Sarah." But I don't remember the exact line, so I can't. And I could never be as funny as she is. She's just hilarious.
There's a part where she says to Hugh Laurie, she's like, "Cause I fancy you." And he's like, "Are you saying that as Sarah or as Sarah?" And she's like, "I'm not sure."
Oh yeah.
No, there was a lot of, like I said, there was a lot of funny stuff in the show. And when you said you were so angry they killed off a character, I thought you were going to say Harrison, because he shows up.
Which one was he?
He's the like extremely aggressive, rich, black British guy in the kind of bathrobe.
Yeah,
and like I liked him because, like, most of the rest of the characters are kind of like incompetent and hopeless and everything, and he's just like really like a force of nature.
Yeah, and
it was just so much fun watching him, and then he dies like after 2 episodes, and I was like, no, but
yeah, that was a bit of a waste. But speaking of which, that whole sequence with where the people start dying, it's like, whoa, that got like real dark, guys. Because like a lot of people just die because they're idiots. Well,
I mean,
yeah, it got real dark, man.
I don't know. I thought it was very funny. I thought it was very dark, but I still thought it was very funny.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, it definitely works, but
no, like I was saying to Erin, I mean, I thought the last 2 episodes like really were,
yeah, like
the second to last episode I thought was hilarious, and then the last episode like totally like messed with my head. Like I like felt like so weird after watching the finale. But
why is that?
Like what?
Do you want to talk more about that? Like why do you,
I don't know.
It
just
that?
Like messed with my sense of reality so much. Like it's like this like, wait, am I awake or am I dreaming kind of feeling after watching it. But like, no, but the second to last episode, I thought that was where the show really, really started working for me. I mean, there were like bits and pieces like before that, like there's the scene
of the dead bodies. You mean bits and pieces?
Yeah.
As they shatter.
Well, like there's this scene like with the captain's table, which I think is in episode like 7 or something, and he's just like he's trying to make small talk, and there's like Doug off at the other table, and he's like, "Doug, do you want to join us?" And Doug's like, "No, I'm good here." And then the captain's trying to make small talk, and Doug's like, "Oh, there's some real grade A conversation happening at the captain's table." And like at that scene, I was like, okay, this is like, I'm really laughing out loud at this. And then so what happens in the second to last episode is there's like so many things about this ship that are so like cheesy and fake and everything that the crew becomes convinced that the passengers become convinced that they're in a reality TV show, and they're all like, "Oh, if we just walk out the airlock, we can just, we'll be in like Burbank or something. We just go home." And I
like the woman that's like constantly explaining what VFX is.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And wait, what was I going to say? And then Matt gets up and he's like, the captain's like, "Matt," who's the, passenger liaison kind of guy. He's like, "Deal with this." And Matt's like, "Okay, this is a simulation, but it's just because the universe is a simulation." And he goes up on this whole thing. Like, I don't know, Erin, you didn't think that second to last episode was like taking it up a notch? No,
I did. I mean, I appreciated the latter episodes more than the former episodes, and I don't want to give the impression that I never found the show funny. I did find it funny. I just think it could be a lot funnier, and I think it could be a lot more subtle. I would like, for me, it's it doesn't matter how much I like the flavor. I want more than one flavor, and I just felt like all the jokes were almost all the same flavor. And as I said when I was just discussing Veep, it's the interplay between the really subtle humor and then the really kind of zany or over the top stuff that makes each of those more appreciable on their own terms. So I just like there was just way too many shit jokes. Like, shit jokes work when shit jokes are used sparingly. Although, can I just say that there were a lot of missed opportunities for what they refer to the shit ring that floats around the ship. A lot of missed opportunities there. But anyways.
Well, let me just explain that. So so the ship and apparently
I think it's obvious, Dave.
Doesn't require any explanation.
Well, no, this is interesting though, because the creator of the show, Armando Iannucci, I listened to an interview with him, and he said he went around to like JPL and SpaceX and stuff and talked to rocket scientists and things. And so he actually got this idea from one of them where they said like, oh yeah, we use human feces, or like, we would use human feces as radiation shielding because it works better than metal. And so what happens in the show is that, like one of the pipes springs a leak, and so then it's venting feces out into outer space, and then it sort of like gets caught in the ship's gravity and forms a ring around the ship. Actually, one of the stand-up comedian, one of his lines I really liked is when he comes out and says, "I see a lot of feces in the audience tonight. A lot of familiar feces in the audience tonight."
Yeah, that was good.
Speaking of the the creator talking to people at JPL and stuff. I mean, I have to say, like, as a science fiction editor who has picked apart a lot of different stories for like, something not being feasible and stuff, like in a show like this, I would have. Feasible, yes.
Boy.
Wow. That was
when in Rome.
Applause. But so, I honestly was expecting to find a lot of things that would like aggravate me on from a science fiction standpoint. But I mean, the show, I can't think of anything offhand that like I felt like, oh, that's just stupid. That's just completely wrong or whatever. It's like, I can't. Like, I'm not a scientist, so I can't pick it apart on that level. But I mean, it's like it all works well enough. It all seems pretty believable in terms of like the various stuff that they do. And of course, I definitely believe in the incredible stupidity of the human race. So that part really sang to me.
Yeah, that tracks.
Actually, let me say, John. So actually, another thing, this guy Armando Iannucci said is that that they just kind of like when the stuff is orbiting the ship, like the coffins and everything, that they didn't really like sit down and do the math for that. But he says that a scientist who's like the science consultant for Star Trek, after the show came out, sat down and like spent a day doing all the calculations and said it was about right, what you see in the show. So
that's awesome.
That's cool.
I did think it was a little strange that it took that if all it takes to push them forward from a 3-month or 3-year trajectory back to Earth to a 6-month trajectory is jettisoning some stuff out of the rear airlock. It kind of feels strange to me that none of the engineers, well, all 2 of them, thought of that for the first 7 episodes or whatever it was. Like they have it so that Billy watches the captain push himself away from the captain's table and his chair falls over backwards, and she's like, "Oh yeah, Newtonian physics, right?"
Right. Okay, that's fair.
Anyway.
Yeah. So it's not that the physics of it are implausible. It's that somebody who's an engineer would have that remedial of an understanding of it. That part is implausible.
Yeah.
I mean, let's face it. There's a lot that's implausible, like the fact that there's only one person on the entire ship who knows how to run it.
Right.
That is, I hope, implausible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if everything's automated in the future, maybe that would be plausible. But they didn't really play that angle up very much. But you mentioned episode 8, Dave. There was, and since we're talking about that, there's questioning how many funny lines there are in this. There's one where I can't remember which character delivers this line, but that somebody's drinking a Bloody Mary, and somebody else says it's a small drink named after a woman who liked to set Protestants on fire.
That was Matt again.
Was that Matt?
Yeah.
Matt had most of the good lines.
He gets all the best ones, yeah.
Him and Iris also, I feel, again, another plug for Iris.
Yeah, that part where they find him outside the vending machine. And Hugh Laurie's like, "What's the void?" Because they thought he was going to kill himself. And he's like, "My empty stomach." That cracked me up. All right, but before we get too far away from the science fiction, I have a list here of sort of things we learn about this future world on Earth, which is actually pretty interesting. So the moon has been turned into a massive jail. The Pacific has gone toxic. Cows have died out. There was I don't know how to pronounce this, Huawei Wars. It's apparently some big Chinese telecom company that people are concerned might, have spy software.
Oh, you're talking about?
In their...
Oh yeah, Huawei.
Huawei. Okay, yeah. The captain. It's apparently normal to have 3-person marriages, and then when that splits up, you get traversed. That's pretty good. Somebody says at one point, "Do you remember the phones that you had to plug in?" Implying that they have a wireless electricity transfer. And also the White House has been moved to Buffalo, New York, and there's like some sort of AI co-president.
That was one of my favorite bits.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Like that was to me legit funny. It was the fact that there were. I couldn't understand though why everybody in the White House was in their civvies. Anyways, everybody was like super casual Friday at the White House.
Yeah, well, it's like a bus. It looks like a bus station waiting area.
Well,
yeah, basically.
Well, see, it's because I assumed it was like that was like the super liberal president. So very, very relaxed about those sorts of formalities. And then on the other side was probably the conservative side, and that's where they have the strictly computerized thing that's just going to the AI that's just going to rule with an iron fist basically and not really care about human lives or whatever.
It's basically Alexa, and so when Mav goes in there to beg for the money that she needs to do the rescue, the AI suggests that they jettison 500 non-essential passengers or personnel, and she points out that this might be unethical, and the Alexa president is like, "Thank you for forwarding your inquiry to ethics department."
Yeah.
I liked that. That was good.
Yeah, that was funny.
I mean, I guess I didn't really think about it, but I mean, I think that Washington, D.C. is very, very low. So if sea levels rise, that might be why they need to relocate the capital.
Dave, did you mention, sorry, I think I cut out on the Wi-Fi there for a second, but did you mention the fires in Philadelphia?
No,
Matt said he came from Philly.
Oh, right.
Was it Philly
before the fires?
I think it was Philly. Yeah, before the fires.
And also, Tobey Maguire dies in prison.
Right.
Yeah, throat slit in a prison shower.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Also, Richard Branson fed to his pigs on his private island, and Daniel Radcliffe poops his pants at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that was a fun running joke where they would just throw in like future revelations of like things that have happened. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. See, Tom, I know you did some stand-up comedy for a while, right? What did you think of the hapless stand-up comedian character?
Oh yeah, he made me sweat, but in a good way. Like I thought, I was always like, oh, this poor guy, but I thought he was actually pretty funny. Like I thought most of his lines were actually fairly clever, but I also thought it was clever that he was just kind of just completely like apathetic. Like he's just trying to deliver these lines, and he knows that nobody's going to think it's funny, and he almost doesn't care. He's just like, foregone conclusion, nobody likes me, which I thought was really funny. I thought his argument with the set guy, where he's like, hello, is this thing on? And they're like, yes, it's on. And he's like, no, I get it. That's a joke. Like, you just say, is this thing on? Because nobody's laughing. And the guy's like, I don't get it. And then he keeps doing it, and the guy keeps saying, it's on. And
no, I don't know that actor, but I was assuming he's a real stand-up comedian, because like the way he does the non-funny comedy is really, really funny.
Exactly.
Yeah, you got to be next level to be a comedian, playing a comedian, doing humor that's not funny but make it funny. Like that's like some Inception level humor shit.
Good point. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, and there's I think there's a couple characters that we haven't mentioned yet. So, we've got Karen, we've got Spike. I guess I did mention Neelix, but we haven't said anything more about him. Mads, Cyrus. So let's see. So Cyrus is like the weird engineer down in the secret control room.
Oh yeah.
Mads is the very good-looking Swedish model on the bridge. Spike is like a former astronaut who thinks that everyone is really impressed by the fact that he was the 30th person to orbit Mars, but nobody really is. And Karen is sort of a woman.
Yeah,
is a woman who's sort of a bossy customer who sort of becomes the leader of the passenger revolt, and then is kind of co-opted into the system. But so John, do you have any thoughts about any of those characters, or if you can think of any other characters that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I mean, poor Ethan Phillips, who plays Spike and played Neelix, he keeps getting cast as a guy that's stuck on a spaceship that doesn't have any chance of returning home, or if it does, then the show ends. So it's like, that's gotta suck. But at least he doesn't have to sit through 8 hours of makeup every time for this show. But there's also the quarreling couple. You mentioned the husband earlier with the captain's dinner, who was making the snarky comments.
Yeah, it's like Doug and Mia,
right? Yeah, I don't remember the woman's name, but yeah, and they're pretty funny. But let's see.
Well, actually, let me just say about that, because I found them really uncomfortable at first. Mm-hmm. Like, I know that sort of quarreling married couples is sort of a staple of comedy, but I usually find it pretty uncomfortable to watch. I sort of like got used to them after a while. But the one part that made me laugh is, Mia's about to go out the airlock with some of the other passengers in episode 8, and then doesn't. And then Doug says, they're sort of like having a little reunion, and Doug says, I don't want to live my life without you or something. And she's like, oh, here you have to go and make it all about you again.
Right.
That made me laugh. But I don't know. Does anyone else share my discomfort with quarreling married couples in comedy?
I don't know that that's a general issue of mine, but I sure didn't like this one. I found them one of the most grating storylines. I think in part... there were moments where I liked it. I quite liked the scene where they're kind of in therapy with Matt. I thought some parts of that were quite funny. And Matt says something. He has one of his funnier lines there where he says something to the effect of, this is a safe space, except for the fact that we're in terrible physical danger or something like this. But just there's a lot to be said for the delivery of Zach Woods for lines like that. But so I liked that scene, but I found a lot of that storyline just grating. And I didn't particularly care for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're probably my least favorite characters on the show, but yeah.
I also really don't like Spike's character. I think Spike, that character has so much potential, and there's all credit to Ethan Phillips. He's doing what he can there, but I think that character, there's a lot of unexploited potential in the premise of that character, and having him just be like the cheesy guy with the ponytail is a waste. So I'd like to see more out of that. I think it would be actually a source of really good humor if he actually did have a clue about space. It's still not really clear to me whether he does or doesn't. There are some moments where it seems like he does, and other moments where it seems like he doesn't. But having somebody who is, like the constantly overlooked solution to all their problems would actually kind of, I think, be funny. So I would have liked to see more of that. Personally, like of the secondary characters, but I had a lot of time for Karen. I particularly had a lot of time for the costume designer for Karen. If anyone's planning to do a rewatch, I think that like the range of like leisure suits that they put her in is just so amazing. Like if you've ever spent any time in retirement communities in Phoenix and Florida, places like that, you know what I'm talking about. It's really well done. They've made some excellent costume choices there, which I think really adds to the overall appeal of Karen.
Actually, one of the, because, I was, I just watched the finale last night. And so this morning I was kind of going, should the captain be the main character? Should Billy be the main character? And one idea I had just before we started recording was like, wait, should Karen be the main character? Because you kind of think about it, right? Like, you're a passenger on this ship and you find out that like the captain's incompetent and the engineer died and like everything's going to hell, and you like are uncovering all these mysteries. You're sort of like proactive and you're uncovering all these mysteries, and then you have to like take matters into your own hands and like, save the ship and tell people what's what. Like, that could potentially, she could potentially be the most interesting character, in this, sort of driving the story.
She's a good one. I still also really like Rav a lot. I'm kind of excited that she's on the ship now. I worry that kind of takes away from part of what makes her work is being the harried person on Earth. I think we might miss that character, like that role. But I am excited at the prospect of seeing more of her because I really did like her. I also have to say, I hope that they keep going with Mads. Mads is your like resident Wes Anderson character, which I think could be really, really good.
Just when they're looking for Matt, like in the dark tunnels, and Mads is like, it's me, Mads. I'm the really good looking one, the very well moisturized face. Yeah, I don't know. I thought there were I thought there were a lot of funny lines in this show. But Tom, do you have anything you want to say about any of those characters, sort of secondary characters?
No, not really. I think you guys have covered it all.
All right, cool.
Well, I was gonna say about the secondary characters. One we haven't mentioned is Frank, which is Karen's husband, who's just like sort of a nothing person. Like, he doesn't have anything to contribute. He's I mean, basically he holds Karen's purse, and like that's kind of his thing. But he gets sort of thrust into the limelight at one point when he's selected to be like the everyman who can push the button to do something, but on the ship, but it doesn't actually do anything. But then when everything goes awry, everyone blames him anyway. Yeah. And I thought that was pretty funny.
That was fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
He actually, I think, was at the center of one of the bits that I really appreciated, which was, I thought, pretty subtle by this show's standards, which was when he's going through his kind of identity crisis, which I guess he kind of always is. But there's one episode in particular that focuses on him not feeling like he has a purpose. And Matt is doing his Matt thing where he's, trying to be his life coach and encourage him to be whatever type of Frank he wants to be. He's like, go wild, go crazy. What can you think of? And he says something like that he wants to be the kind of guy that wears a seashell on a leather thong around his neck. And this is like the most rebellious thing he can think of. And I don't know if you noticed, but he spends the rest of the show with a seashell around his neck. I just think is great.
That is very
like subtle. He's living his best life because of the seashell.
Have any of you guys actually been on a cruise? I never have. I'm just wondering
how
much of this is like a real cruise.
I have, and I thought they missed a lot of opportunities. I've never been anyone who ever aspired to go on a cruise, but I've been on two. And
sometimes these things just happen.
Yeah, the first one I went on, I was 14. My brother was on the entertainment staff on the Queen Elizabeth II for 2 years. He went around the world for 2 years on this giant cruise ship, at the time the largest in the world, and he got us free tickets. My parents and we got free tickets, so we were kind of like the Karen. What's her name? Is it Karen? Is that her?
Mia.
Yeah,
Mia is the wife.
The one who's in the leisure suits. I mean.
Oh, okay.
That's Karen.
Yeah,
Karen.
Because Mia got the free tickets through her hookup with.
Oh, pardon me. You're right. I thought it was Karen. Okay. So anyway, we got free tickets and we got to go on, and it was amazing, and the food was just astounding. But there was some really bizarre, because I think what this show does well is it just says, look, here's a bunch of people you don't like, quote unquote rich people. They're all irritating. They don't contribute anything to society. So let's put them all in a pressure cooker and see what happens. And I think that the show does very well at that. That is true to life, where I can vividly remember being in an arcade on the Queen Elizabeth II playing free video games and being like, this is awesome. There's a doorbell on each video game machine unit, and you just press the doorbell and it racks up a credit. So I was playing video games and loving it, and there's this little boy next to me, and he's playing video games in a suit. And these two kids run through the arcade chasing each other. And one of them bumps the little kid in the suit next to me with an elbow. and barely touches the kid. I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and here I am, this 14-year-old kid, and I'm like, oh, they kind of bumped that kid. Well, the father of the kid in the suit bends down and grabs the child, one of the children who was running, and starts shouting and says, my son is a child prodigy and he plays the violin in concerts around the world. And if you've damaged his arm, I'm going to sue your parents until there's nothing left. And he screamed this in this 8-year-old boy's face. And I just, it was an eye-opening moment for me. I was just like, who am I on this boat with? Like, this is crazy that this guy just did this. And there were, that was probably the craziest thing that happened on that ship. But the second cruise I went on was after my wife and I were married, just before we had kids. We were like, we're going to go on a vacation. I'm more the type of, my wife and I both are more the type of people who will go, like to Costa Rica and go whitewater rafting or kayaking, or, I've been all over the Americas kayaking and lived in several different Latin American countries, or at least been in several different Latin American countries for extended periods of time and lived in one of them and just kayaked all the time. But we went on this cruise instead because we were like, well, we don't have much time. We don't have much money. Let's just go on a cruise. That's the thing that people do. And some friends of ours were going, and we're like, all right, fine, we'll go. And it was bizarre. It was really bizarre. It's just like people with like extra money but not that much time who are just like, let's just do this thing. And I thought they missed out on, they could have put in the show things like the food on cruises is crazy. Like, you'll have people who just sit there, and I was one of them because I saw somebody else do it, but it'll just sit there and be like, bring me a lobster tail. And then they bring you a lobster tail, and you're like, bring me another one. And they bring you another one, and you're like, bring me another one. And you're like, I've had 8 lobster tails, and you just keep ordering it. And the waiters are like told, like, don't argue with the guest. If the guest says, bring me 8 lobster tails, bring him 8 lobster tails. And just really like crazy excess. And then the people working on the cruise ship who are from developing countries who are like, just trying to make like that was a huge missed opportunity. Maybe they'll pick it up in season 2, like some disenfranchised people trying to make ends meet, just living a real life and trying to like smile in the face of these crazy, like rich people who are just basically, it's kind of a little bit disgusting. And then also the idea of like when you stop somewhere and you get off and you go around and you like visit things, and like I was thinking, well, what else is going on in this future world they've created? Are there not like space stations somewhere or a moon where they're, where they get out and like somebody gets abandoned? Because that happens frequently on cruise ships. Somebody when you get off, they tell you, if you're not here by such and such a time, we'll leave without you. And they mean it. They mean it. They'll leave without, they'll be like, well, sorry, bye. And they'll just leave. And leave you to figure out, how am I going to get home now? And that would have been cool. That actually almost happened to me. We were swimming, and I was had a little bit of problem with when you swim as a man and then you walk, you get a little bit of a chafing problem sometimes. We were walking for miles, and my wife was like, we have to run. And I was like, I can't run. I'm going as fast as I can. This is incredibly painful.
Tom, this is funnier than anything we saw on Avenue 5.
Well, I was thinking like this could like, they could do
like
stuff
trying
like
to explain the nature of the chafing and why you can't run.
Yeah, well, they were actually pulling up the gangway when we got there. We could see them, and I was like, I have to run now. And I'm running, and there was somebody shouting off the edge of the ship, "You selfish jerk! You held up the whole ship." And I'm like, I'm sorry. And they could go on cruise ship forums and read these stories, because I'm sure there's lots of these forums where people talk about their cruise.
And not just cruise ships. And this is the thing that I think you've really kind of helped me think through what one of my main disappointments is there's so much comedy gold to be mined that wasn't. And instead we had a lot of very generic humor. Whereas I think, one of the things that Veep did really well is exploit some of the eccentricities of working in government and, working in the White House.
Yes.
And we didn't really get that with this. And it's, not just cruise ships, but all-inclusive things in general. Where is the person who's in charge of doing the ridiculous activities that keep people happy? You know them. If you've ever been on spring break at an all-inclusive, you've seen the overworked person in the hot pants trying to get you to go into the whatever stupid inflatable ring and punch each other, or get up on the sort of off-brand bungee jump or whatever.
Yeah, Julie.
There's all kinds of that. Yeah, I guess I haven't seen The Love Boat, but that sounds about right. There's always somebody who's in charge of, like pumping up the crowd. I think that could be really funny. Another thing you see a lot, particularly in the developing world, is the nanny situation, where you've got these rich parents who've come there precisely because what they want to do is foist their kids on somebody else and have their kids looked after by, some harried nanny who doesn't know them at all and has a bunch of kids in their charge so that mom and dad can sit Mai Tais by the pool. And so you end up with this situation of all these hellion kids who are taking it. It's like having the substitute teacher, right? They don't know this nanny. This nanny doesn't really have any authorization to discipline them. And if they try to, they're going to catch hell from the parents. Anyway, there's
agree.
All sorts of idiosyncrasies that go along with this type of environment that would make for some really good humor, especially if you add that space element. So I love your idea of the stop-offs. Like, where's your intergalactic trinket shops?
Right. And also the it's very common to have norovirus on board cruise ships. So it's this awesome, all expenses paid, all you can eat. You're just like pigging out and drinking all this alcohol. But then all of a sudden, like, everybody on the ship is sick because they cannot get norovirus out of the cruise ship. So that would have been fun to play with.
Space pirates.
Yeah, I was just going to say the space harpy from Space Pirates. Yeah. Oh, you were talking about actual space pirates attacking the cruise ship. Yeah.
Actual space pirates.
Yeah,
Pirates
that would have been
a thing.
That would have been fun. And also just the whole general Caddyshack ethos of, like, how Caddyshack was just about, it was basically written, I think, by people who had been caddies who were like, these rich people are crazy and we have to work for them. And like, anybody who's worked at a ski resort, like the Caddyshack of snow sports is called Out Cold. Actually, a guy that went to Colby College with me, Dave, you went to Colby as well, but this guy was actually in my classes, and he made this movie called Out Cold, which is really funny, but it's from that point of view of we're the people who work behind the scenes at the resort. And I feel like that should have been more of a focus, more of like, here's what normal people feel like when they're working in these menial jobs, looking at these crazy rich people, and all the excess and nuttiness that they're getting up to.
See, John, I didn't hear, did you ever go on a cruise?
I have not. The closest I ever got was the Stoker Awards were held on the Queen Mary one year, but it was parked in dock because it's just like a permanent thing now. But it's like, so it was basically, it got turned into a very shitty hotel because, when it's a cruise ship, it's like, it's kind of fancy, you're on a cruise and you're sailing around and stuff. And it's like, when it's just parked in the dock, it's like, okay, well, these rooms are all really shitty though. And it's also really old. So, but it was fine, but no cruise for me. I actually get horribly seasick. So, just as well.
I guess, Tom, when we were talking about, talking about this panel, you said that there's this book, Starship Titanic, which is actually, it's based on a computer game that Douglas Adams designs. And you said there was a novelization that was originally by Robert Sheckley, and then they hired someone else to do it ultimately.
Yeah, so Robert Sheckley in his later years, he turned in a lot of sort of, he was very funny at short science fiction. And then when it came to books, he did some really cool books early on. And then when he got older, he did some kind of so-so books. And I think this was probably one of them. They hired him to do the novelization of Douglas Adams' video game I think it was after Douglas Adams died. And he wrote it. And I used to correspond with Robert Sheckley. He's very funny. If you haven't read his short stories, I highly, highly, highly recommend them. But he wrote it, and then they tanked it. They said, no, we're not gonna do it. And he was telling me about this when we were emailing back and forth. He's like, yeah, I don't know whatever happened to it. So I started Googling it, and I found a copy of it by him. He was like, yeah, Terry Jones ended up writing it. He wrote it, and they released it they released his version. And so I started Googling it, and I actually, at some like obscure online bookstore, I found a copy of it that said it was by Robert Sheckley. And like an idiot, I emailed the guy who owned the bookstore and I said, hey, if that's true, that's a really rare book. Can I buy it? And it disappeared off the site like that day. And the guy never answered any of my emails after that. I was like, hey, I was checking back on this, and he never answered me again. So I was like, okay, and Robert Sheckley was like, oh, if you get a hold of a copy of it, I'd love to hear about it. I'd like to, maybe send me it. I'd love to read it to see how it came out. But so it was like, ironic to me because, here the Titanic was something that they said was unsinkable, and then it sunk, and then Douglas Adams made this game about it that was supposed to be awesome because he's Douglas Adams, and then that vanished, and then the 2 books written about it also vanished.
So how does it compare to Avenue 5? Like, is it, I don't know, just how do you remember the story well enough to say, like, to compare and contrast them?
Well, no, I've never read it because it just vanished. The whole thing like collapsed under its own weight. It's I think there's a couple of copies of the Terry Jones version out there, but I've never read it. But I did watch a Twitch stream of the video game Starship Titanic, which is where it started. And the video game got really bad reviews, and it doesn't look anything like Starship, like Avenue 5. It's more like you're this lone person who's on this cruise ship in space who all the passengers are gone, and all that's left is robots, and you're trying to solve the mystery of what happened. And it's very ponderous. It's very cool for like a 1990s video game. The graphics are amazing, but I think, I don't think it was anything major.
See, John, did you have something you wanted to say earlier?
Oh, I was going to say about the all-inclusive stuff, which I hadn't really been thinking about when I watched the show because, I'd never been on a cruise. But I started to think about the scene after the captain gets fired or quits or whatever it was. He gets removed from his position as captain temporarily, and he's going to the buffet, and then he's like going to pay, and like his little wrist computer thing, it like won't let him pay, and so I mean, it was like kind of funny in the moment, but then thinking about it in terms of like what you guys were just saying, it's like, well, I mean, it really kind of seems like this would be an all-inclusive sort of experience, you would think, like rather than nickel and diming the passengers on this, who are all rich. Like you think that it would have just been an all-inclusive experience. So that, I guess that was kind of strange, but.
You're saying they wouldn't have even had to show any ID or anything to get food, yeah?
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're on the ship, you can, eat whatever you want, but yeah.
Maybe
maybe they should have spent less time at JPO and more time on cruise ships. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. The science doesn't actually need to work in this at all.
Right.
Is the irony of it, right? Like it doesn't need to make sense. I don't need to be convinced that that feces are the best way of refracting radiation. I actually thought that was bullshit, no pun intended, but slightly intended. But it doesn't matter. That stuff, it doesn't matter at all. But yeah, I do think, and I'm sitting here thinking of like all the different directions you could take it. You could have the school field trip on it. You could have the people who won, the sort of like, okay, so one of the stupidest things that ever happened to me was one time I accidentally, I don't know how, got upgraded to first class on Qatar Airways, not business class, but first class. So I had a cabin and the whole thing. And I don't know how it happened, but of course, just the way life works, I end up doing this stupid thing where I get my iPod, this was back in the days of iPods, somehow stuck in the mechanism of my flatbed between that and like my private mini bar or whatever. So I try to extract it, and to make a long story short, I get completely stuck, like literally inverted, feet in the air, hands jammed down in the mechanism, so that the flight attendants walking by can just see my feet sticking out because there's like a gap so they can kind of see what's going on in the cabin. Like my feet sticking in the air, and this, "Are you okay, Mom?" And I'm thinking everyone on this plane is going, that's definitely the upgrade. Like the one charity upgrade they do for whatever rando economy class passenger. Anyway, something like that, like where you have people who are upgraded into this experience who don't belong there. There's just all sorts of potential for it. And so I do think, to go back to what I said right at the beginning, despite all of the problems that I had with this, I think the premise is rich enough, the cast is talented enough that, and the writing has enough potential that once they find their rhythm, I think there's a good show in here, a really good show in here. I haven't seen it yet, but I think it's there.
Yeah, I just want to say about the other science thing I liked was how they actually had the communications delay where, a lot of science fiction or just shows ignore that. and it actually they have like a 30 or 40-second delay when they're trying to talk to people between Earth and the ship, and that creates a lot of humor. Actually, the showrunner said it would realistically to Saturn would be more like a 5 or 6 minute delay, but they cut it down to 30 seconds to, so it was funny, but not too ridiculous. But no, I think I totally agree with you, Erin, that like the humor works really well and the cast is fantastic, and you have all these great comedic actors. And I just feel like it just needs, I think you said, like, it's sort of only operating at one register, really. It's just sort of the absurd humor. And it just needs more, more colors, in the palette, more.
Yeah, more texture.
More drama, more mystery, more like whatever. And not a ton, but just enough so that it doesn't feel like sort of so samey episode after episode.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think this style of humor is like fine for a feature, like a 90-minute feature film or something. But when it's, 9 episodes, I think, you need a little bit more variety. But I don't know, we're pretty much out of time, so we should probably start wrapping this up pretty soon. Tom, do you have any other, anything else you wanted to bring up about the show?
No, I just think it has. I want to end on a positive here and just say it really has fantastic humor. I mean, so many great lines. Like, and most of them I thought, but a lot of them by Josh Gad. Like when somebody's like, "Do you want to limit the oxygen?" and he's like, "No, but look into it." But no, but do. And he keeps going on that, and then the skulls of all 4 beetles, but one of them is actually one of the monkeys because they couldn't get that one, And then at the funeral for the captain, when I can't remember who says it, I think it might be Matt, but he's like, "There was no one like you, Joe, and now there definitely isn't." It was that was all from episode 2, I think. But there's so many funny lines in this series, and my hat is off to the great comedic minds behind the scripts.
Yeah. So, John, what do you think about this whole conversation we've had? Is this sort of what you were expecting, or?
I mean, I wasn't sure. I knew based on the fact that I had seen a lot of negative reviews and stuff that there was a fair chance that not everybody on the panel was going to love it. And that's usually not my favorite, panel to walk into, where it's like, oh, I love the show, and then everybody else is like, this was a piece of shit. Like, what is wrong with you? 'Cause I don't particularly enjoy like defending a show that I liked, or whatever. But then, I mean. But this was better than I was actually expecting. I figured somebody would dislike it much more vehemently than anyone here did, and it seems like everybody generally liked it. But maybe not. Clearly nobody liked it. I don't think anybody liked it as much as I did. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. For what it's worth, everyone listening, I'll just reiterate how much I like the show. I'd watched it, like I said, when it first aired, and then Christy and I rewatched it all leading up to this, and I mean, every episode we watched, we just wanted to watch the next one, and it was only because it's oh, it's too late, we have to go to bed, that we were stopping. So it really worked for me. And,
so bottom line, people on this panel were nicer than, or not as nice as you, but nicer than people on Twitter. Right?
Yeah.
That's going to be on my headstone. Nicer than people on Twitter.
Erin, final thoughts? How do you feel about the show after all this conversation we've had?
I mean, yeah, I think, like I said, I have mixed feelings about it, but I overall, I was pleased to see that it's been renewed for season 2, because I do think it has a lot of potential and it deserves the chance to prove itself. I'm in the camp that thinks that there's more work to be done there, but I definitely, coming out of it, with even with all the quibbles that I had, I will definitely tune into season 2.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, I thought it got better as it went. So if you want to give, and I always feel like there should be more science fiction humor, and I'm always happy to give the benefit of the doubt, because there's just so few shows that are good science fiction comedies. But so yeah, if you give it a chance, and the first couple episodes you're kind of on the fence about, in my opinion, it does get better and better as it goes. And like I said, the last 2 episodes, really kind of had a big impact on me. So yeah, definitely curious to see where it goes in season 2, and hopefully they can take the the humor, like I said, and just, you know, have a little bit more of a story than they had in season 1. All right, so cool. So why don't we wrap things up there? So we've been speaking with John Joseph Adams, Erin Lindsey, and Tom Gerencer. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Always good to be here.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to John Joseph Adams, Erin Lindsey, and Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.